At 5:12 in the morning, a rooster opens its beak. One sound, loud enough to be measured by scientific instruments at 120 decibels, roughly the same intensity as a running chainsaw, standing right next to it. Within minutes, a neighbor calls the city, not animal control for cruelty, not a health inspector, the noise complaint line, because in thousands of towns and cities across the United States, what this bird just did, simply by existing, simply by making the sound its species has made every single morning for thousands of years, is against the law. Not the bird itself necessarily, the sound it makes. In New York City, this exact scenario has been illegal since 1924. An entire species, effectively banned from an entire city because of one specific behavior it cannot stop doing. Today, we're going inside the strange, surprisingly long, legal history of America's war on the rooster crow, and the biology behind a sound so loud, cities decided it needed its own law. To understand how a bird's call ended up written into legal code, you first have to understand what that call actually is. The rooster's crow isn't random noise. It's a specific, deliberate vocalization, one of the most recognizable sounds in the entire animal kingdom, used to mark territory and signal dominance to other roosters nearby. And here's the detail most people get wrong. It isn't purely triggered by sunrise. Roosters crow throughout the entire day in response to light changes, other roosters crowing nearby, and their own internal biological clock, a circadian rhythm that researchers have found continues to drive crowing behavior even in complete darkness. For thousands of years of human agricultural life, this wasn't a problem. It was useful, a natural alarm clock embedded directly into rural life for a population that lived and worked according to daylight. The conflict didn't begin with the rooster. It began when cities grew up around it. As American towns expanded and suburban development pushed outward, a sound that once echoed harmlessly across open farmland was suddenly landing directly on someone's bedroom window 15 feet away at 5 in the morning. In 1924, New York City passed something formerly known as the Roosters Ordinance. At the time, keeping small numbers of chickens in residential yards was still relatively common, even within city limits, but complaints had been building for years. Residents, increasingly living in denser and denser housing, exhausted by being jolted awake before dawn, pushed the city to act. The ordinance did something unusually direct for its time. It didn't just regulate rooster noise. It banned owning roosters within city limits entirely. More than a century later, that law is still on the books. New York City remains one of the strictest jurisdictions in the country on this exact issue, an outright prohibition rather than simply a noise restriction. But New York wasn't creating a new idea. It was formalizing something that was quietly becoming standard across the country, as more and more American cities grappled with the exact same collision between agricultural tradition and urban density. Today, rooster laws across America form an inconsistent, often surprising patchwork. There is no single federal law addressing rooster noise. Instead, regulation happens almost entirely at the local level, through municipal zoning codes and noise ordinances that vary dramatically from one city to the next. According to research tracking backyard chicken regulations nationwide, an estimated 95% of U.S. municipalities that allow backyard chickens at all specifically prohibit roosters. The reasoning, city after city, comes back to the same measurement. A rooster's crow typically registers between 120 and 130 decibels. For comparison, that's roughly equivalent to a chainsaw or a rock concert measured near the speakers. In a standard residential neighborhood, on a typical 50-foot lot, that kind of sound doesn't stay contained to one backyard. It can be clearly heard within a 2-block radius, sometimes further, cutting straight through the early morning quiet that most zoning laws are specifically designed to protect. Not every city takes the strictest approach. Chicago, for example, doesn't ban roosters outright. but its municipal code broadly prohibits excessive animal noise, which functionally accomplishes something similar. Cities like Austin and Portland take a more permissive stance, technically allowing roosters, but only under noise complaint provisions, meaning ownership remains legal only as long as no neighbor formally objects. The moment one does, that legal permission can effectively disappear. Understanding why this sound is loud enough to warrant its own laws requires looking at what's physically happening inside the bird. Roosters don't produce sound the way mammals do, forcing air across vibrating vocal cords in a relatively simple structure. Birds use an organ called the syrinx, positioned deep in the chest where the windpipe splits toward the lungs, capable of extremely precise, forceful sound production. For a rooster specifically, researchers studying crowing behavior have found something remarkable about how the bird protects itself from its own volume. At the exact moment of crowing, specialized soft tissue in the rooster's ear canal partially closes, acting almost like a built-in set of earplugs, reducing the intensity of sound reaching its own inner ear. Without that adaptation, a sound this loud, generated this close to the animal's own head, could realistically damage its hearing over time. This detail matters because it reveals something important. The volume isn't an accident or a biological flaw. It's a deliberately evolved trait, loud enough to travel significant distances across open land, specifically because that range once mattered enormously for establishing and defending territory in a natural environment. A trait that evolved for open farmland and forest edges, now echoing between the close set walls of suburban houses 15 feet apart. If this deep dive into something as ordinary as a rooster's crow is surprising you as much as it surprised me, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps stories like this reach more people. These laws don't stay theoretical for long. Rooster disputes have become one of the more common and more emotionally charged neighbor conflicts in American residential life. Legal forums and community boards are filled with nearly identical stories. A family purchases what they believe is a small flock of hens, only to discover, weeks later, that one chick has grown into a rooster. By then, an emotional attachment often already exists. Neighbors, meanwhile, describe being woken repeatedly before dawn, sometimes for months, before finally escalating to a formal complaint. Legally, courts have consistently sided with the authority of local governments on this issue. There is no constitutionally protected right to own a rooster within city limits. Municipalities are broadly free to prohibit or restrict them, and in legal disputes, the burden typically falls on the rooster owner to prove an ordinance is unreasonable, not on the city to justify why the law exists in the first place. For families caught in the middle, the outcome is often the same, regardless of how much they've grown attached to the bird. Rehoming to a rural property, surrendering the animal to a sanctuary, sometimes a fine that keeps recurring until the situation is resolved one way or another. A single bird doing exactly what its biology evolved it to do, becoming the center of a genuine legal and emotional conflict, repeated in thousands of backyards across the country every single year. So what does a century-old ordinance about a farm bird actually reveal? At its core, this is a story about a collision that keeps repeating throughout American history. Traditional agricultural life and the sounds, smells, and rhythms that came with it, running directly into the tightly packed, noise-sensitive expectations of modern suburban and urban living. The rooster didn't change. Its biology, its instincts, its territorial crow remain exactly what they've been for thousands of years. What changed was the space around it. Backyards shrank, property lines moved closer together, and a sound that once dissipated harmlessly across open fields now has nowhere left to go except directly into a neighbor's bedroom window. The legal patchwork we see today, strict bans in some cities, conditional tolerance in others, isn't really about roosters specifically. It's about how modern society keeps trying, city by city, ordinance by ordinance, to negotiate exactly how much of the natural world we're willing to let live directly next door to us. So the next time you hear a rooster crow somewhere in the distance and it doesn't wake half your street, remember what that simple, ordinary sound represents in certain cities across this country. A bird doing exactly what evolution built it to do. A sound engineered, quite literally, to travel for miles. And in more American cities than most people realize, a piece of the natural world that quietly became illegal, not because of what the bird is, but because of what it can't stop saying. If this story changed the way you'll think about the next rooster you hear, subscribe to Birdhearts so you never miss the next hidden mystery in the bird world. And tell me in the comments, did you know a bird's call could actually be against the law where you live? I'll see you in the next one.